الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Continuing the subject of the means or al-asbab for matters of rizq, provisions, the al-asbab al-shar'iyya, the religious means that we get to know from the wahy, from the revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as mentioned before, there are so many, and they are acts of ibadat that a Muslim should be upon them, seeking rewards from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the hereafter. And with knowing that this is something that one of the means of rizq, there is no harm in this whatsoever. The foundation of one's ihtisab or seeking rewards is in the hereafter, and it brings, by the will of Allah, the rizq and the provisions, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala either mentioned that in the Quran or in the hadith of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. One of which, and it's something that we all in need of, especially for those who have all kinds of relatives all over the world, it becomes important for them to realize this importance of Silat al-Rahim. And Silat al-Rahim is to connect. Sila is to connect. And that's why the word or Silat al-Rahim is not really well served when it comes to a translation, or at least for myself, I don't know a good translation for the term Silat al-Rahim. Al-Rahim is the kin and kith. Al-Rahim comes from the womb. So the relationships that people have as human beings, we come from one generation to the other. So anyone that has a relationship with yourself through a womb. So the usul wal-furu', the foundation or the roots of the person, the father and above, grandfather and so on, and whoever is related to them comes from them, the branches, and what goes below, the son, the grandson, the daughter, the granddaughters, and so on, and also the branches that comes as a result of that, brothers and sisters and cousins and second cousins and sixth cousins, it doesn't, whatever there is. That's why ilm al-ansab or lineage as a science is important in the deen of Islam, and a person knows his lineage, not to have fakhr or to be proud of it, because this is one of the ways of jahiliyyah for people to have this prejudice towards when it comes to their lineage and where they come from and so on, but rather to observe these different rights that people have upon him, because this is the deen of Allah. A person has to find them, has to seek all kinds of kindness that needs to be given to them. And that's why Salatul Arham is not just by being kind with words or being there for them when they need help financially, physical help. Is just the entire concern is there, that they are part of oneself, that a person should check on them, call them, see how they're doing. If they need financial help, you help them. If they need any means of help, you're always there for them. And the opposite of that is a major sin, which is qat' al-arham, when a person sever the relationship because of matters of dunya, inheritance, or they said this or they did this or whatever there is. This is not permissible whatsoever. And of course, with Salat al-Arham, no sins are permissible. No sins whatsoever. Because this can be fitna for people. Because if you don't acquaint yourself with some of your relatives in haram settings, for example, they have mixed gatherings and men and women are sitting together, no hijab, nothing like this. And if you don't go, they will consider you as someone that is qat' rahim or severing the relationship. So they might boycott you, give you a hard time. The seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is what first and foremost. And لا طاعة لمخلوق في معصية الخالق. No obedience to any of the creation of Allah when it comes to the disobedience of Allah. But then for the one that has the concern of this ibadah, even if that happens, a person has to do the best he can that the relationship is not severed from his end. So he's still continuing to be kind to them and to be there for them and to go visit them when they're not having, for example, sinful gatherings, right? It's not like, well, they're evil people. They wanted me to commit sins, so I'm not gonna, talk to them. No, this is not permissible. But rather, why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded us to have the strength of these types of relationships and to do things where people even normally would not do as a result of this. So, and there's so much details of that, and to be kind and to enjoin good and forbid evil and to wish for them what is best, not just once in a while. And the reason why this is one of the means of rizq is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he said, "Man habba an yunsa lahu fi athari wa yubsat lahu fi rizqi, falyasil rahima." Whoever wants to live longer, this is one of the means of living longer, and to have وَيُبْسَطْ لَهُ فِي رِزْقِهِ, and to have abundance in rizq, فَلْيَصِلْ رَحِمَهُ, then let him have صِلَةَ الرَّحِم, this connection of goodness and kindness and all of what that means to those who are relatives. And everything is by the qadar of Allah. That's why this is one of the means of physically having a longer life, but not according to what you think of a longer life. So as the ulama, they said, according to the angels, and everything is in the Lawh al-Mahfuz, if that person is kind to his relatives, he would live till he's 60 years old. It doesn't have to be something that is too long of a life. But if he doesn't, he'll die when he's 40. The angels, they do not know exactly which one. It depends on what's going to be from his actions. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So this is like physically longer in one's life, and some said it's the barakah of the life, is the blessings of life, and both are correct. Because the hadith clearly states this. And at the end, after 1,000 years from now, not 100 only, after 1,000 years from now, it doesn't matter whether a person lived 20 years or 80 years or 100 years. At the end, what matters is the value of this life, the barakah that was in it, the blessings in it, when it comes to the good deeds, and staying away from what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbid. So this hadith states clearly that this is one of the means of abundance of rizq, provisions. But as long as we do it in the right way, and one of which is to prepare oneself that it's not going to be based on rewarding one another, as mentioned before, all the time. Because this is always mentioned there, because if a person, people are kind to him, relatives are very nice, they're well-mannered, and they're doing all the good things to oneself, as a normal thing of a decent fitrah, a person would return that with all kinds of goodness, right? But what if they're not? He has to still continue to be good to them. As the Prophet ﷺ, he mentioned that in that subject, ليس الواصل بالمكافئ وإنما الواصل الذي إذا قطعت رحمه وصله. The wasil, what is the definition? What's the definition of the one that is making salat rahim? It's called wasil. That's the individual. Ismul fa'il, that means the doer of the salah. Who is the wasil? Who's the one that connect the relationship? The Prophet ﷺ said it in a way that he is not the one that bil mukafi. He's not the one that rewards, meaning returns the goodness with goodness. This is what is obvious. It's a very obvious thing. And then, as mentioned before, many of the things that are obvious, you won't find too much nusus or text about it because it's obvious. You won't find too much text talking about the parents being kind to their children. It's an obvious thing. But you would find the opposite, to be kind to the parents, because that's not the obvious, because many would tend not to be. So he is not the one that would return the goodness with goodness. This is a very obvious thing. But rather, al-wasil, the one that is having salat al-rahim, is the one that when his rahim, his relations of womb is severed, is cut off from the other side, he will connect it. Wasalaha. He's the one that keeps on connecting that relationship. So this is, again, it's a very serious matter. Not just for seeking more provisions, but the warnings that came in the Quran, فَهَلْ عَسَيْتُمْ إِن تَوَلَّيْتُمْ أَن تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَتُقَطِّعُوا أَرْحَمَكُمْ. That would you then be among those who, when they turn away, they spread corruption on the face of earth, and they sever the relationship of the womb. Came with al-ifsad fil ard. As corruption on the face of earth is when people sever the relationship of their kin and kith and relatives and so on. This is spreading corruption on the face of earth, or equal in the same level of sin. Person might find himself, he's making salah, giving charity, mashallah, perfect. Nobody's perfect, but in his ibadah, dhikr and so on. But how his relationship with his family, one or two or more, because of some worldly matters, because he said this, or because of some inheritance, or because of this and that, this is all irrelevant. This is an act of duty of seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we are tested with our relatives, with our neighbors, with the people in the same masjid. We're tested with everyone. So how is a person going to conduct himself not according to what he thinks or what he desires, rather according to the deen of Allah. And we have in the Prophet ﷺ the best example. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it easier for each and every one of us to seek these means of good provisions when a person fulfill the commands of Allah. Sallallahu alaihi wa sallam.